Vi har sittet her og snakket om vi skal være veldig presise, eller om vi skal skli ut i det sammensuste akademiske kvarter. Av en mellomløsning. Så vi begynner nå. Dear guests and dear audience, and welcome to the second lecture of the Doppus series this autumn. My name is Fredrik Schettlik. I'm the Vice Dean for Education at the Faculty for Architecture and Fine Art at NTNU. This series has the intention to be sort of an open house for speeches in architecture and fine art to the public audience. And it's very good to see so many people here. One other thing is it's a sort of a special occasion because this is a collaboration between the Dopphuset series and the Biennale MetaMorf. And the director of MetaMorf and Tex, Espen Gangvik, and I have been talking a lot about doing some collaboration of exploring how is the relationship between art, technology, and architecture. So now this year we have been able to arrange a lot of collaborations, and we would very much like to expand on this for the Biennale 2 years ahead of us. So I'm very happy to introduce Espen Gangvik for a short introduction of.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Fredrik, so much, and thank you for having this opportunity to program for your wonderful lecture series. It's our second biennial MetaMorf this year in 2012, and we had this conference last weekend, opening conference, with the curator and moderator for the conference. Her name is Rachel Armstrong, Dr. Rachel Armstrong, and I asked for some advice to come with an input for this series, and she said, obviously you should go for my dean. And actually Neil Spiller, sorry. Some other Neil. Neil Spiller said yes, and I'm really happy to do that because also in the context of the biennial, a matter of feeling, we are also trying to investigate how processes in nature and sciences and also in social behaviors has to deal with maybe feelings more than clinical approaches or clinical processes, which you can read all about in a beautiful catalog or book we have for 100 krona back there, and also brochures for the program for the rest of the month for the biennial. Neil Spiller is Dean at the School of Architecture, Design and Construction at the University of Greenwich, Professor of Architecture and Digital Theory, Founding Director of the Advanced Virtual and Technological Architecture Research Group, Avatar, and practicing architect as well. I think just to give a little kind of context to Neil's approach to architecture and digital processes, I'd like to quote him. He says, amongst others, what has disappointed me is the way the architecture profession has taken to virtuality by one particular route, which now has been exploited to the point of ubiquity. There's a lot more about the virtual world and how it rubs up against architecture that needs exploring. So, please, Neil.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yes? Yes, good. Beer, lovely. In America and in Britain, beer's banned now in academic environments. So, but I think it will help us along the way tonight. Espen wanted me to talk a little bit, just to frame who I am a tad. Once upon a time, there was a man called Peter Cook, and in the early 90s, he was recruited to run the architecture school at the University College London, the Bartlett School. One of the first people he got in, or headhunted me, across a urinal, was me. And I stayed at the Bartlett, helping build the Bartlett for nearly 20 years, and became Vice Dean of UCL, of Bartlett School in UCL. I was getting jaded, I believe the expression is. I thought that the Bartlett School had become scared of itself, scared of the leading edge, and I was looking for the next opportunity. And it just so happened that a couple of years ago, the next opportunity came. The University of Greenwich in southeast London, in the wonderful Royal Naval College buildings there, asked me whether I would be Dean of their new architecture school, which they're currently building at a huge cost, just round the corner on a World Heritage Site. The architects are Hennig and Peng, and we're busy rejuvenating that school, ready to move in. So it's a big challenge, and one that I find very exciting. Just before I start, let me just see if this works. Now, I knew that wouldn't work, you see. PCs, I'm a Mac sort of person, because I like the way they look. Being a professor of digital theory.
You just go into PowerPoint.
Nice. PowerPoint. PowerPoint. Is that this one here? Is that a right or left click? Oh, look. You see, they're not right, are they, Macs? They're not right at all. There's something of the devil's work in a Mac, in a PC. Macs are beautiful. They look beautiful. They operate like a desk. You know, it's just drag things. There you are. You've seen it all. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mario, and thanks for the beer. So I know we were talking about fictional influences. We were talking about all sorts of stuff. I forget the title, algorithmic architecture, for example. My algorithms are very different. But first, before I get into any of that, I wanted to start with an apology. If any of you are a little bit sensitive, you need to be careful. What you're about to see is a lecture that's I've been accused of being a feminist. Of course I am. I've been accused by evangelical Christians of misquoting the Bible, which means I'll burn in hell. I'm a surrealist with maverick deviational tendencies, and I'm going to make allusions to desire. I'm going to make allusions to male and female parts. I'm going to make allusions to, and I am going to misquote the Bible if you believe in certain things. But this is the way of the world. If we all agree to agree, and if we don't celebrate difference, then we are doomed. So anyway, I'm going to tell you about, I want to start this lecture with a quote. I'm going to perch this, I can't remember all of this quote. And it's from my, well actually I'll read you the quote first. Well, I believe in poetry in the soul of every man, in F-111 fighters and Roberto Duran. There's poetry on the air, babe, sliding across the sky. Surfs right down on the radio wave and into my hi-fi. I believe there's poetry locked up right inside my skin. Tigers caged in the quantum zone and I can hear them sing. Poetry's under pressure, sealed in an aerosol can. Splattered all around the ghetto wall and the Skid Row mark I am. Poetry dances on TV, spins in the VCR. Poetry's made in Scotland, and they serve it behind the bar. Those are the words of my favourite philosopher, who is not Jacques Derrida, and who isn't Jean Baudrillard, or whatever, however you pronounce his name. I suffer from an English comprehensive school education, which, alas, is not comprehensive at all. So that's why you may, when I lapse into French, you may think, what's he doing? Because I gave up French at 14 and did technical drawing. which was the choice in those days because they're similar, see? Anyway, I was going to speak. My favourite philosopher is Zodiac MetaMorf. And you'll notice from that quote, it's a tad old. It talks about VCRs and hi-fis. It's let's go to say 1985, and this wonderful album, The Tattooed Beat Messiah, came out. Unfortunately, Zodiac doesn't necessarily look as attractive now as he did then. He wears trousers slightly larger. But one of the things is one of the important things is that you are conditioned by your generation and the kind of cultural stuff around you. Zodiac MetaMorf is very important to me. That doesn't mean you should all go out and listen to Zodiac MetaMorf because a lot of it is misogynist. That doesn't mean I like it, I'm just saying. If there's any, sorry, I forgot I wasn't in America. So I'm going to talk about the Communicating Vessels project. The project is 250 drawings long. It's been going about 15 years. And it's the repository for everything I feel and do in my own creative life when I'm not deaning. It has 66 subtitles. I'd like it to have 666. This is a kind of frontispiece that was designed. If any of you are fans of the sort of post-punk 4AD record company from the 80s, and the wonderful album work of Vaughan Oliver, who now is my visiting professor of graphic design at Greenwich, you'll know he did the sleeves for the Pixies and the Breeders and Lush and all that. You might know that. You might all be too young. Anyway, him and me, when I was in my final years at the Bartlett, when I was laundering money, I gave him some money to help design the frontis for what might be the Communicating Vessels. But now I've tried to publish this many times, but the last time I took it to a publisher, the banks collapsed. So they were a bit worried, so it didn't get through. And you might see why later. Anyway. I want to talk about the Communicating Vessels project, which is an island, and I'll talk a bit more about the island. I'll show you pictures of it. The island of Vessels is a huge chunking engine, a communicating field full of witchery and sexuality. Its neurotic objects are pataphysically enabled and surrealistically primed. The album's geography is cyborgian and always teetering on the edge of equilibrium. Its groves and glades are inhabited by ghosts, some impish, like Alfred Jarry, some nude on staircases, and some with Darwinian moustaches. So, in 1966, well, actually, I'd better tell you that this island is a kind of mythical island. It's an island that's half there in reality and half there in my mind. This is what happens when you have secretaries who staple things together. And at the front of this island, I wanted this island to be a kind of psychogeographical area or repository or memory theatre for this project. And it needs to have a gate at the front. And the gate is called the Angel with the Brazilian Bush, stroke Lilith. Now, Lilith, according to some mythologies, is the first wife of Adam. Ooh. If we follow the passage in Genesis 1.27 closely, and I quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female he created them." It's okay so far. This before describing the creation of Eve from Adam's rib. This is read by some to mean that God created a female at the same time as the male. And God called her Lilith. But Lilith and her husband started to have what I believe you young people call a domestic about the jiggy-jiggy. a key medieval reference to Lilith is the alphabet of Ben Sura, written between the 8th and 11th century, to be very accurate. In it, she is quoted as saying, "I will not lie below." And he said, "I will not lie beneath you, but only on top." She uttered the name of God and went away. God sent 3 angels after her, but she rebuked them and mated with the demon Samuel and other demons to create countless Lilin. She is said to be the mother of all succubi and incubi. She appears oddly in C.S. Lewis's The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe. The White Witch says, this is a quote from Mr. Beaver, you'll understand. "The White Witch would like us to believe that she's human," said Mr. Beaver, "and it's on that she bases her claim to be queen. But she is no daughter of Eve. She comes from your Adam's first wife. Here they call her Lilith." So Lilith, the American sitcom Frasier, his first wife was called Lilith as well, obviously. I don't know whether she went off and married Samuel, but anyway, so at the front I wanted a kind of symbol of female emancipation. I wanted something that set the tone for the island. So in 1966, Salvador Dali created this sculpture, and it's called Lilith, Homage to Raymond Roussel. So it's 2 statues. Are they the victory of the Sabbath race? I don't know. I wasn't taught properly. Pushed between them some paper clips to make a sort of gesture at the female, thingy. So the front of this is just a sketch. It's not a proper drawing. You'll see some proper drawings in a minute, but this is just a sketch. So it's the angel with the Brazilian bush. So at the front, I wanted allusions to classical mythology, Leader and the Swan, Bernini, all sorts of stuff. And I wanted to create a reflexive architecture that had fingers in different types of architectural history. For after all, the project on one level is a memory theatre. I'm just going to have a little drink. I've got a frog in my throat. That's not part of the lecture, by the way. So this is a fountain in the Barberini. Is it Palazzo Barberini? No, it's the Pizza Barberini. That's again bad education. Bernini created these areas, these fountains, and they contain certain symbolism. The waspy bee thing is the family symbol of Pope Urban VIII, who was a Barberini. And of course, bees and wasps, very, very important to us surrealists. Duchamp wrote about them. Now, as winter and autumn comes, more and more leaves drop into this pool. If you imagine a kind of virtual sort of skin across the pool, as more and more leaves drop, they could be used as an impulse, taken back to my site, an input piece of data, and it makes the bush grow because it's winter. In the summer, they disappear and the bush gets smaller. That's where the Brazilian bit comes in. There's the bee. Now, what's this bush made of? It's made of aerogel. Aerogel is 99% nothingness, but you can make a tube of it. And it's like cigarette smoke. It can be made to drift away. How are those curves of the bush made? Well, I wanted the curves of the bush to kind of engender the kind of genetics of my architecture. I've worked for 25 years on this drawing board. And this drawing board contains all the cuts, the lines, the smudges, in a kind of palimpsest. So it contains the genetics of my architecture. But equally, the drawing board's like the old drawing tables that the Gothic master masons used to use. There's a wonderful example in Wells Cathedral in Somerset in England, where there's this 3-metre square stone table which just rests on the floor, and it has these inscriptions, very much like a Liebeskind drawing. and it contains the genetics of that cathedral. Now, they used to lift it up as they progressed over 500 years, and it currently resides in the attic of the cathedral. So I like this idea, and I wanted something to sniff out those genetics and create those space-time vectors. And so I created these two little, I call them slam hounds after William Gibson, tied together, sniffing and sensing space-time vectors. So on another level, this project's about a series of inputs taken from different places of importance. For me, I don't know about the rest of you, it's just me in the world, and translating, pushing them into making kind of virtual or biotech landscapes on this island. I just like that one. The other thing that this project's about is about metamorphosis. Metamorphosis, Ovid, metamorphosis. Here we see Bernini's great sculpture, Apollo and Daphne, currently in the Villa Borghese in Rome. And it catches the god just starting to fondle Daphne, and to escape his amorous advances, she turns into a tree, like you do. Now, this is an old motif. Here we have, from 1499, allegedly written by Brother Colana, the Hypno-Erotomasia Prolifero. So the changing into the tree comes from Ovid, comes from before that. The kind of tree growing from the head is also a Darwinian motif. With him, it's often the olive tree. Metamorphosis, things change into other things. And this is part of the reflexive architecture idea. So here we see one of Bernini's last sculptures, not quite finished, which resided until about 1920 and 1926 in his heir's house. So he hasn't quite finished it. It's called Truth Unveiled by Time. And because it's not finished and not in its final resting place, its fingers are propped. So they're bits of stone that need to be clicked out when it gets to the right place, otherwise the removal men break it. But equally, the hand here is supported by a third nipple, which also would be cut out when it was moved there. I want you to look at this detail. This is the foot of truth, weighing heavy on the ball. The sun, time, see with the struts there. And in the old days, when they used to do computer-aided manufacture, computer programs used to make struts while they were casting or spraying their stuff around. So that was interesting at that. It's just a kind of reminiscence of the strut and the kind of architecture before the architecture, or the architecture to maintain the architecture. At the bottom of the gate, there's a structure that's called Little Soft Machinery. So here we see it, Little Soft Machinery. There you are. There's a bladder, some stem cells, and an old testicle. And of course, the foot of truth. Well, I'll tell you about that later. So here's Hieronymus Bosch. So biotechnology, ethically biotechnology, what do you think? Well, so here's Hieronymus Bosch. He's got fields of eyes, he's got woods of ears, and he's got amongst it an owl. In Boschian language, the owl is a symbol for the devil. So Bosch, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, was saying, there'll come a time where biotechnology allows us to make walls with arms, fields with eyes, woods with ears. Is that not the work of the devil? Now you see, here's Little Soft Machinery. There's the foot of truth, particularly aged foot of truth. Now, Little Soft Machinery. Let me tell you a story about him. In 1926, there was a book published in New York by, I think, a lady called Mary Liddell. Her surname was certainly Liddell. he says, but of course you're videoing this, so I might get caught out. But she also did the illustrations. It was a children's book, and it was the first book that got away from the Edwardian fairy idea, where there were fairies at the bottom of your garden and you communed with them and only the children could see them, and it was a kind of Arcadian world. Little Machinery lived by a scrap heap and was a self-creating machine. And here is a picture of him. Remember, this is contemporary of Man Ray's rayograms of cogs. So actually, it's quite an extraordinary, or some of Picabia's work. Extraordinary thing. Here's Little Machinery. Here's Little Machinery sharpening the claw of an eagle. It's very nice of him. So here's Little Soft Machinery. I wanted to make this kind of point that we were at a kind of ethical juncture. And Little Soft Machinery sits at the bottom of the angel with the Brazilian bush and looks out across the road, and is a kind of contemporary Marinetti, a contemporary kind of futurist. Gets excited by all these cars, all these fumes coming past, and starts getting aroused. Fills up the bladder until the point where the bladder becomes full of stuff. And I'll tell you what the stuff is later. And the foot of truth bears down on the bladder, and suddenly it evacuates all over the tarmac. Now, what does he evacuate? Well, Zodiac Mind Warp tells us it is the holy gasoline. The holy gasoline, or the grease. And it's the grease that powers this landscape. It's a grease created by desire, machinic desire, which is nice, isn't it? So here's the island. When I was brought up as a boy in a place called Sturry, which is the next village along is a place called Fordwich, and on it there's an island. It's reputed, although this may be lies also, to be one of the smallest inhabited islands in the UK. I love this place. I've never set foot on it. I always used to gaze at it from the other side of the river like this. And this is a project that's not about negating nature. It's about augmenting it, or showing us another side to human existence. So it's very Arcadian. Always photographed, as always seen, from the other side of the river. Now, across the road from this is the tarmac that Little Soft Machinery made such a mess of, is the Georgian Dragon, which appears in one of the James Bond books, Goldfinger. Bond stays there one night. Ian Fleming used to live round the corner in a place called Sandwich. Yeah? No, you've disappeared. There you are. Yes, yeah. No, I'll tell you one more piece about what... I'm going to take you on a small tour around this island. I'm just going to talk about one more piece before it's more beer time. Okay? The D stalls. So, here's the river. Here's the bit of the island. There are 6 boxes. Each box is about 3 buttocks square. The bicycle seat on the top. A small boy is standing on the side of the river that's not the island. A young girl, very beautiful girl, 17 and nature's queen, comes bouncing along. A contemporary Diana. She sits on one of the boxes. It starts to vibrate, like a washing machine, really. Each box is attached to a fishing rod, which is attached to an alchemic alembic in the river. As it vibrates up and down, up and down, up and down. Suddenly, grease is formed, so the black is grease. And the grease wanders off for other things that I might tell you about later, if you're nice to me. Inside the boxes, one day she got very curious. There's only so much washing machine that a young girl can take. So she got interested in what's inside the box. What's inside the box, Neil, I hear you cry, because you are also interested. That's what's inside the box. There is a De Chirico Muse, Duchamp's draft pistons, some Swiftian gearage, a Duchampian door. Outside is a small model of a sewing machine. 5 artificial lips, a teeth paver, a turd-like object, and in the middle, well, there's obviously a ready-made bicycle wheel. In the middle is a wonderful, wonderful thing on a kind of big angle poise, and that is the Klineman. So this is where I introduce, and the Klineman on one level is like a painting machine. Indeed, it is a painting machine in this, and you can start seeing some of the spurts. When the box is sat on for the first time, it starts to become a painting machine and throws paint across this interior kind of surrealist landscape. But simultaneously, there's a kind of augmented landscape that floats across this terrain and out through this funnel and over the sewing machine. Oh, I'd love to see a perspective of that. I bet you can't draw a perspective of that, Neil. Well, I can. There's an alchemist's alembic. There's a disquieting muse. There's the Klineman, like a kind of sea anemone with a hole at its centre. So when it's a pataphysical laboratory. I better talk to you a little bit about pataphysics. There are 3 declensions. Pataphysics was invented by Alfred Jarry, who was a nutter. He was a poet and writer of prose, an addict of ether and absinthe, probably at the same time. Hugely talented person, proto-surrealist, but not really able to cope with the real world. I know how he feels. There are 3 declensions of pataphysics. It's a kind of above and beyond metaphysics, whatever metaphysics is. So again, I wasn't educated properly. And the 3 declensions are anomaly, hybridity, and the final one is Klineman. Klineman's named after the swerve of an atom as it falls to the ground, as in Lucretius's description of atomics. The swerve, the ability to make something different, to turn something into something else. And if anything, this project is about the kinematic swerve. Some wag has written, the thing about the Chinaman, Klineman, that's a swerve. So there are various things. The turd-like object, I think it's important. I don't know what's in it. Well, when I drew this drawing, I didn't know what's in it. I know what's in it now. And if you're nice, I might tell you later. It's important that work has elbow room. It has an enigmatic space in it that you can read and reread. So these drawings are not done as finished things. Of course, they are finished, some of them. But it's about the ability to reread in them, to push the imagination onwards. Now, what about that virtual terrain that flags through the box? Here's a planting plan. It's a landscape. It's a virtual landscape, and it has zones in it like planting plans. Quadrangle, Kurt Switters. Surprises, Raymond Quinault. So these are poetry. So on one level, the D stalls are a kind of surrealist remixing of poetry, where the paint lands at a certain point in time. Surrealist poetry is remixed. But that's kind of a sideline. The other thing is where the paint lands. There's another third cyborgian landscape, if you like, cyborgian geography. And that shows where the planting plan of vistas will happen across the island. So there's our virtual landscape about to slip out the funnel, like you do. I think I'm going to stop there and allow you to get some beers, because you probably need one now. So I hope you stick around for the second half. I hope I've intrigued you. I hope I've given some inkling of the wonderful, spectacular world that I have to show you. And I'll see you back when they tell me it's time. Hello. Hello, I feel like a magician. Are you ready then for the second bit then? I'm going to tell you about the Velasquez machine. This is the Velasquez machine, and it's one of the first bits of the project that I did. The project's been running since 1998, and there came a point where I thought, well, I ought to finish it, and then I thought, nah, bollocks. Because it embodies everything about me and my nasty little world. So this is the Velasquez machine. Its site is in the elliptical galleries where Monet's great water lilies are. Why they're near? Well, I'll tell you. The water lilies are a kind of perturbation in the history of art. They are at the point where the figurative becomes abstract. So I wanted something to sit there and again take some impulses and relay them back to the island near Canterbury in the UK. So I better point out the elements to you. There's this kind of cage. Inside the cage is a frying pan with some holes drilled in the bottom, and on the frying pan are some fish. And jumping up and down the fish are some roux objects, the kind of hypodermic acid-injecting roux objects. And then there's this funny wobbly couch with a kind of hypersensitive tongue. And then there's this. This is a fried egg on a plumb line. It's not a real fried egg, that would be stupid. Which my learned audience will understand is a reference to Spanish vernacular painting. So that's the basic elements of it. So, and it wobbles. It's connected to the internet. It wobbles. The more and more architects put their nasty little bits of crap on the web, the more web content about architecture, it starts to shake itself apart. Velasquez, obviously, the great painting Las Meninas, 15 whatever, I wasn't taught well, is a kind of narcissistic act in a way. But it's a wonderful painting. It obsessed Picasso, it obsesses me, it obsessed Foucault, it obsessed a lot of people. Joel Peter Whitkin, don't look at that. So, as it shakes itself, the hypodermic inoculators, of which there are 9, don't ask me why, jump up and down on the fish, replaced every day by a small person with a crucifix on their T-shirt, I suppose you call it nowadays. And as the fish decompose, bits of fish end up on the very hypersensitive tongue, which is always manipulated by this kind of oncological couch, I call it. And so these become part of the planting plan of the vista. Back. Now, the plumb line, obviously, and the fried egg, a reference to Spanish vernacular painting, the fried egg being a Darwinian motif, oscillates. As this thing wobbles, it oscillates, and that becomes the trajectory of a sculpture that moves around the vista. So here's one of the roux objects. Forget all this malarkey, that's all contemporary music notation. There's the hypodermic syringes, the bouncy bits, so kind of mechanical flea. So they bounce about. So that's one impulse for this vista. The second one's the measuring stick. Now if we go back to, I think, again, 1505, Bramante's Tempietto, the flowering of the Renaissance in Rome, although now it's in Spain, because it's the Spanish embassy. Well, the bits around it were. So there you are. It's a perfect act of architecture. Although not included in Jeff Kipnis's book, but nonetheless. amazing. So this is the Spanish embassy, the Spanish guards, beautiful. Now, of course, when you build a piece of architecture, there's two basic problems, or two discrepancies of geometry. One is the ideal classical proportions. You can't carve stone that accurately, so there's minor differences, so it's a difference. Also around it's a square courtyard. Originally, Bramante wanted a radial courtyard, something like that. Ignore the interference. So it was going to be like this, with more columns, you know, classical architect columns. But of course, that didn't happen. So the square courtyard was built. So there's another discrepancy. So there are two types of discrepancy. There's a minor discrepancy between full-blown mathematical proportions and tolerance of the builder. And the other one is about, it relates to something that's not there anymore. So these discrepancies I wanted to be measured, and the crosses in the plan are about the Spanish guards coming and moving a stick, a measuring stick, not a very bright stick. Because nowadays we make everything so smart, don't we? Look at my iPhone. Well, don't look at my iPhone, but you know, it's the same as yours. But it's smart, isn't it? Smart. One of the key design decisions of the 21st century is how dumb to make things. So they move the stick, there's a stick, move the stick, put the stick down, it starts to measure differences. Those differences become vectors, velocities, or whatever on the vista. So this is the head of the stick made by one of my students. So the problem is when you get a student to work for you, they go abstract, because I've taught them. So I sacked him. He made a model. It's very nice. So when all this data from these two input sites manifest themselves on the vistas, something quite incredible happens. Firstly, I needed to design, every vista has to have a finish somewhere to direct the eye to. That was too square. So what I wanted was a sculpture that kind of moved around. And this is called the wheelbarrow with expanding bread. So here we are, and it's a homage to Salvador Dali. There's the metro light from Hector Guimar, which Salvador Dali said was like a praying mantis, and had this kind of psychosexual thing about the praying mantis, female praying mantis, eating the head off the male praying mantis after copulation. There's the bread, a Darwinian symbol for stupidity. It's an expanding bread. It's not real bread, that'd be stupid. So it's kind of like a balloon painted like a bread. Truth to materials, not for me. Now, as this sculpture moves around, well, there's all sorts of stuff going on there, but for the sake of brevity, as the sculpture moves around, and as people look at the bread in different positions, the bread has what's called a subsumption architecture, which is a simple imperative. It might be to float. This piece of bread's subsumption architecture is to show 50% of its surface to anyone who's looking at it, which can cause a lot of trouble, a lot of fuss and bother, as they say, if three people are looking at it. So it contorts, and in the parallax of those gazes, something else happens. But so you might get, here's a simple vista. So you've got your bits of fish coming down here, making aerogel vistas. You've got the sculpture oscillating because it's following the line of the fried egg on the Velasquez machine. And you get these, and you get viewing points over time. And those views create parallax areas. And in those parallax areas, where one person can see but another can't, because they're looking at different sides of the bread, something happens. So it gets complicated. And that thing that happens in those kind of canoe-shaped black areas, I wanted to, is a kind of dance of death. If you go back to Jura, in the medieval times, there was a whole tradition of what they call the dance of death, which is people producing drawings that talked about no matter how rich you were, how pious you were, there was always death tugging on your shirt or weeing in your in your bucket or whatever, right? So it's saying, we're all going to die. Fuck it. No, they weren't saying that. They're saying, we're all going to die. Be religious. And Dürer wasn't the only one who did this. So I wanted something to be kind of pulling at the sculpture, saying, we're all going to die. Let's be surrealists. And what I wanted to appear in this kind of slipstream is this. This is, well, we don't know what this is, but it's called Père Ubu. And it was a photograph made by Dora Maar, who was a mistress of Picasso, in 1939. Père Ubu was one of Alfred Jarry's characters, in fact, the one that made him infamous. So Père Ubu was king of Poland before there was a Poland, and he was a tyrant. It's probably a baby armadillo, but we're not sure. But it looks like just like Père Ubu. So here's a drawing of the combined bits and pieces for no apparent reason, apart from it looks nice. I have no guilt when it comes to that. If a drawing looks nice, we're having it. It's fine. I don't care. I don't have this modernist guilt. Oh, truth to materials. Form follows function. Ornaments crime. So here's a site plan of the island. So here you see the lines of the vistas coming out. At the end of the vistas are places where I've had important experiences. Like that time in the back of the Fiat 126. So, at the point of each vista, these are the paint splashes from the box. They're the origins of the vistas. The vistas then connect to these points elsewhere in the environment around, which are special places. Notice they cross the river. There's the river coming round. There's points of origin. This is obviously the light of God. So these are sketches, these aren't the finished things. So there's the river, and there's these kind of round, sort of primitive rock art type things, which are a whole other conversation, which if you lucky people, I'm going to tell you about. So it grows over time. So the Temple of Repose, which is where the origin of each of these vistas are. Oh, there's a whole other symbolism here. So, André Masson, Gradiva, very important surrealist motif about touching the ground lightly. Pompeii, George Jensen, is it? Jean Tangley, another Dance of Death, where Jean Tangley did a whole series of sculptures. His neighbour's house burnt down, so he ran in and out, made sculptures out of the burning bits. There's a Vaughan Oliver dog there, a kind of quote of my old mate. There's feet touching the ground lightly, big baseball glove there. So this is part of a two-piece kind of thing. And just to tell you, Salvador Dali created psychoatmospheric objects, which, don't quote me on this, is if you get a surrealist, put them in a dark room where they can't see anything, you get them to fondle an object, you then take a picture of that object. I don't know whether there's any film in the camera or not, it doesn't matter. And then you cast the camera in lead, and then you let the lead dry on a warm haystack, then you create a psychoatmospheric object. Now another one is Duchamp's, where you've got a ball of twine between two plates and it rattles. So you don't know what's in there, so you start projecting what's in there. So here we are, we have one of Diderot's architecture before architecture of a horseman on a horse. Inside that, various webcams all over in my special places in the Fiat 126. Starts photographing things, casting things in metallic objects. They drop out the belly of the horse onto the warm haystack. And there they are, the baseball glove, massive electromagnetic force from the orbiting table, catches the psychoatmospheric object in the baseball glove, the power's turned off, falls through the hole, makes these rock art kind of sculptures. All of which have histories of my individuality. There's a love seat here, the ribbed love seat of Le Corbusier, up here. He did a drawing, which is similar to that, only not as good, without that bit. And it was called Père Ubu. 1952, New York, something like that. Makes you think, doesn't it? So here we see the point of origin of the vista, the wheelbarrow with expanding bread starting to oscillate around the vista. Where the vista crosses the river, I wanted to create a gate. I was very inspired by Gdansk many years ago, where there's a Renaissance bit of the city built in, I think, 1948. Because, you know, Germans, Russians, Germans, it all went. So they built it again. And it's very nice. And you go down to the dockside, and at the end of each street is this wonderful ornate gate. And you walk through, and there's the dockside. There's the Russian fleet, all rusty. And I wanted this aerogel kind of gate at the point where all the vistas went, like cigarette smoke. Now, how was I going to design that? Well, if you put a little antennae on a bee's head and let it fly around a bit, it creates patterns like this. If you collapse those patterns into 2 dimensions in a computer, and you can hand them or superimpose them, you get a heavy metal Art Nouveau gate that drifts away the moment it's made, like cigarette smoke, which is nice. That's a very bad, cheesy photo montage made by my assistant, who's now dead. So how do you notate a space like this? There's lots of talk about diagrams, isn't there, in the early 21st century. How do you notate a space that is that sort of complex, that sort of algorithmically surreal? Like that. So, another piece on the island is the genetic gazebo. I've been a fan of and sort of been lucky enough to be influenced by and being in the same room as a guy called Gordon Pask. Here he made an artificial ear. And it's a self-wiring electrical system. If you change the inputs, it's silver nitrate or something, it rewires itself. And I kind of like that idea. So this is Gordon's schematic of the electrodes and their self-wiring. And I wanted to create inside this gazebo, which exists, a table, and on that table, a kind of Paskian matrix, 4x4 matrix. And I wanted to get some inputs for that. And again, I wanted that to be inputs for this landscape. So, 4x4, I wanted to create something that would determine the long dimension of the psychoatmospheric object. So this is a kidney-shaped bird bath divided into 4. You'd be lucky to get in there if you were a bird, but nonetheless. So that encourages, so with that, whichever bit they bath in is a coordinate. There's a piece of amber here with some prehistoric mosquitoes in. Their DNA is another impulse. Down here, represented in the furry gooseberry motif, is is a gerbil who died in 1976 called Mickey. And Mickey has a genetic code too. So as we switch from either that and that, or that and that, or that and that, we start getting coordinates. We start getting a self-wiring system as we put electricity into these. And that creates dimensions. And those dimensions become the dimensions of the psychoatmospheric objects that are caught by the baseball bat and baseball glove, etc. So here are some real, they're called dendritic, dendrite, forest, tree, dendritic structures. Here are some real ones made by someone else. Makes you think, doesn't it? That's what's in the amber. And that's a kind of exploded doo-doo of it. And I wanted, as each of the impulses, something else that rise up and kind of flower in a kind of Leonardo da Vinci grotto sort of way, like you do. And this is Leonardo da Vinci's water-damaged grotto-like thing. So I wanted above this, in the roof of this gazebo, this kind of aerogel kind of sky. And I hear the sustainable and ecological people in the audience go, well, that's all well and good, but how do you power that in a world where we're all going to be drinking our own wee-wee soon? Well, it's a river slapper. If you imagine an object sitting in with a long neoprene spiky tie, couple of oranges up there, I don't know why yet, and a kind of mixing slot thing. By the gazebo is a weir, so it's all doing that. So the tie sits there on the weir, does all that. Thereby, we pick up those vectors, and it becomes, what do you young people call it? Energy. So that's all sorted then. This is a cheesy photo montage done by my assistant, who's now dead. But it does show the weir. Here are some drawings of the psychoatmospheric objects that have been elongated by that kind of genetic gazebo. And I also got into Robert Rauschenberg. Who's Robert Rauschenberg, Neil? Well, he's a bloke who's dead now. And he did two drawings, two things, called Factum 1 and Factum 2. And it was about trying to duplicate Factum 1 in Factum 2. So he did them simultaneously, trying to make the same marks. And the same marks are not achievable. Excuse me. You can't replicate anything exactly the same. This is what Alfred Jarry was on about. You can't make it. You have to celebrate difference. We will never be like this. You sitting there thinking, what a nutter. Me sitting there thinking, they're thinking, what a nutter. All dressed in the same haircuts, the same clothes, same underpants. It's never going to happen again. Modernism and its ubiquity in architecture is wrong. It will never happen the same time, the second time the same. So here's Factum 1 in a way. I'm just showing that because I like it. So that ended rather quickly. Anyway, not to worry. So what there were two drawings of the psychoatmospheric objects. They were then superimposed in the wonders of Photoshop, and you could see the difference. I tried to draw them at the same time, just illustrating this fact. But you can imagine that, because you're all imaginative people. So another thing, this island is commanded by this kind of figure, and the figure's called the Baroness. So here we have another illustration from the Hypno-Erotomachia Prolifero, 1499, Brother Kalana. And it shows a kind of bower of people enjoying themselves, presided over by it's an English word, I suppose, priapric, invigilator. Now, this is Baroness Elsa Freytag von Lorenhoven. She was a Dada poet in New York, 1916, 1917, 1915. She used to write poems. She had the studio at that time next to Marcel Duchamp. She fell in love with Marcel Duchamp and she wrote him a poem, and I shall recite it. Marcel, Marcel, I love you like hell, Marcel. She used to upset everyone. She was a bit of a sort of punk, really, although the word hadn't been invented there, I guess. Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not educated very well. She used to go to the ambassadors' parties with just a coat on and some tomato tins as a bra held together with gardening twine. And she used to put postage stamps on her face as makeup. At one stage, she shaved all her head off and dyed her head purple. She used to put bus tail lights on her bustle. And she also didn't wash much, so she smelt, which I think frightened young Marcel. That was a picture of the Baroness relaxing at home with a canary, but obviously my machine has censored it. She made objects of found objects. This is a hip object that she wore. She made some earrings. You can buy them anywhere now, can't you? Eh? Especially in San Francisco, up Orange County way. This one's either called Circle or Woman. I'm not sure which. This one is a fantastic thing, a kind of pretzel of plumbing, a phallic pretzel of plumbing. This was about contemporary. Do you know about Marcel Duchamp and the fountain, where he exhibited a urinal in the Armory show in 1917, 1916? Well, the Baroness, in the same year, now that was good, you know, that questions what constitutes art, what constitutes the ready-made, you know, what is art? Is art just something that happens to be in a gallery? Which was great, and that went down as an absolute classic of 20th century art. Baroness, however, is better, right? Because not only does it do all that, because it's got plumbing involved, it was in a gallery, it's also blasphemous because it's called God. So my vote on this one, it's only the first half, mind, is on the Baroness. She made a sculpture of Duchamp emerging from a wine glass like a bird. So once you've seen the Baroness, you obviously want one of your own. So I started sketching Baronesses. She had a dog called Pinky, and Pinky here is represented by, in the surrealist manner, by the two cherries. It was a male dog. So this is the second Baroness, and this is the Baroness that presides over the island. Now, of course, Duchamp, this is called the Bride Strip Bear. And so what we have here are the draft pistons, as mentioned earlier, the bride, the vibrating bachelors in masturbatory fervour, the chocolate grinder, don't ask, coffee grinder, and some stuff, other stuff. It wasn't finished because there was going to be something here, and that was called the handler or juggler of gravity. And the bride was supposed to be able to influence it and keep it near equilibrium by her filaments. And this juggler is going like this. It's on the edge of equilibrium. It's contained by and directed by the filaments. And the bachelors are all doing their thing down there in their uniforms. And so there was something missing here. This obviously is a classic of modern art. I said to one of my students the other day, have you heard of Duchamp? She went, no. Another student went, yeah, he's the one who drew on a window. It's class, by the way. So I wanted a bower. I wanted that bower to have the Baroness in. I wanted some teetering handler or juggler of gravity. I wanted some filaments. Oh, I wanted it all. Jacob Epstein, he's a vorticist, I'll invent it, 1910. Rock drill. Rock drill. Rock drill? This kind of robotic thing. Notice its stomach. You probably can't, but you will later. He got so shocked by making his own vorticist comet thing, he took it off the rock drill, and it's only recently been reassociated with the rock drill in London. And normally you just see the torso, which is this bit. He stopped doing these sorts of things because I think they worried him about this kind of robotic world full of these kind of aliens. And started to go back to more figurative stuff. So another Dance of Death familiar with who Alfred Jarry had familiarity with. And here we see a teetering Dance of Death, pulling at something, wandering off, skeleton of death, walking over books. Jarry knew this one, it was in his collection, The Modern Dance of Death. So here we see also Bernini's great sculpture, Thing and Thing, with a child, father, grandfather. Grandfather's got the two family gods on his shoulder, and they're running away from Rome as it burns or something nasty happens. There they are. Lovely sculpture. So here we are. So here's the Baroness in the bar, the teetering rock drill, carrying the family gods, the tree coming out of the pate, as they say. Metamorphosis. The three gods are Ben Nicholson's Talimon cupboard from the Appliance House, Mike Webb's Resurgram from Temple Island, and Peter Wilson's Ninja. And you'll notice the stomach of rock drill is highlighted. Alfred Jarry thought that the organ of imagination was the stomach. Now, the Baroness, she made a video, or a DVD, I forget what you young people call it, a YouTube or something. And it was in collaboration with Duchamp and Man Ray, and it was called, endearingly, Elsa Freytag von Lorenhoven shaving her pubic hair. This is the only still left from that video. Because obviously Man Ray and Duchamp fluffed it up. It's funny, isn't it? So she's standing a bit weird. I mean, she was weird, but she's standing a bit weird. You wouldn't normally stand like that, would you? And one wonders whether this inspired the young Duchamp to create his last great work, which he hid for 20, 25 years in New York and was discovered after his death, called Eton Donné. And you think, well, that leg seems familiar, don't you? A bit familiar that. The surrealist historians do not like this thesis of mine. They don't like it at all. They say it's unscientific, that there's no evidence. About 1926, 1927, the Baroness had gone back to Paris. She was laying on her bed with Pinky, enjoying herself, and there was a gas leak, and she died, and so did Pinky. And on the same day, Hugo Ball, here, pictured at home, relaxing, the inventor of one of the founding members of the Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, which incidentally had Lenin living down the down the road at the time. I don't think he went in their particular parties. He was also inventor of sound poetry, and we see an example on this slide. So they both died on the same day. So all I have to say about that is to die. This is the Baroness, a contemporary artist, dressed as the Baroness, never short of a fork. But in 1917, she used to spend quite a lot of time in jail because the Americans, obviously, bless them, couldn't quite handle it. So that's quite amazing, isn't it? You know, 1917, 1915. She likened men in one of her poems to a defecating toad. Anyway, as we get near the end, the professor's study. Every professor has to have a study. Cornelius Mayer, 1689, The Ideal Gentleman's Room. How a gentleman could have a room, and each of the elevations would facilitate gentlemanly things. So, cupboard for the curios. String for curios. I like that, string for curios. So this is one elevation of one room. This is another elevation. Temperature gauge, urinal. Another elevation of the room. Another elevation, the final elevation of the room. I can't be without my tongs, can you? So I wanted to create a space where the professor, because the whole place is run by the professor, who's nothing to do with me, who created this wonderful island. He's a bit, he likes, as the Irish say, the crack. And he's a creative genius, but sometimes strays. So I wanted the study to reflect that kind of weirdness. And I was also inspired by Carpaccio's picture here of St. Augustine. I don't know what it is, 15 something. Here's St. Augustine hearing the word of God. He's surrounded by his kind of memory palace of all his kind of archbishop things. But it's all wrong. What you've got is the voice of God. He's talking to the dog. And St. Augustine's looking out the window going, "You're talking to my dog." So there's St. Augustine. Shock and awe, shock and awe. So I wanted to do something that, again, had an augmented reality thing. But the professor obviously has loads of things in his study, things he's worked on in the past, things he's working on currently. So there's the dipods from early in my career, in the professor's career. There's a clinamen, there's the old surrealist umbrella, a little bit of do that. An anchovy on a plate, and the voice of God comes through, talks to the anchovy. But overlaid on the top of this is another landscape of baguettes and bratwurst. And they are invisible. If you could I've seen this done. If you get an antenna, put it on your head, and it's the headphones, and you get an aerosol can and empty it out of paint, and you can paint invisible. You have a computer back there crunching code or something, and you paint invisible graffiti in the air, and you can see it on your computer through a webcam-y thing, and you can dictate which areas of that invisible cloud have certain sounds. So I could be over here in my study and stick my finger in Britney Spears. And let's face it, I wouldn't be the only one, would I? Or Van Halen. Right? So, an augmented reality study. The other end of the study, this is Salvador Dali mimicking, but actually trying to show that he's cleverer than Velázquez. So it's something like 6 Corneas having a look at Gala through the mirror. Gala was Mrs. Dali, here dressed as a sailor. Ask no questions, get told no lies. And so the other end of the The study has a kind of funny wallpaper, a bit of a. I have to get my notes for this, so I'm leading up to a crescendo. As if my secretary my admin person has got it all in the right. She might not have. No, so I better busk it. So there's various bits of my previous work from other projects and stuff, and there's the mirror and the kind of thing and the thing and the thing and some more thing. The backdrop to it is called The Wallpaper of Shem. Shem, another one of my heroes, James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, not a book to read from cover to cover, but to dip into on the bus. Was a big fan of Alfred Jarry, and in it he quotes all sorts of characters and events from Jarry's life. Duchamp's in there. It's a kind of history of contemporary culture, and particularly art, if you read it in certain ways. I was hoping to finish with my crescendo, oh well. You might be lucky. Okay, so that's that. But the Baroness's filaments. Here are the there's Baroness here. Tomato cans. Filaments. And the filaments are about working out where the sculptures are in the vistas. And they're kind of augmented as well. They're not really there, but that's what they look like, maybe. So here you see it streaming out of the Baroness. And there's another bit to the project which I'm not going to tell you about because I still haven't designed it properly. And here's the perspective showing the filaments and how they work relative to the circling vista. And the grease that powers the whole thing. One of the inspirations for this project is Angela Carter's The Desiring Machines of Dr. Hoffman. Fantastic kind of book about how desire powers a landscape, powers a city. Goodnight room. In the great green room, there is a Darwinian bone and a black balloon and a picture of a big fishy spoon. And there are dummies sitting on boxes and two little slam hounds and a pair of psychoatmospheric objects airbound, a little bird and a muff all furred, and an alembic of Greece all able, and a professor whispering swerve. Good night room. Good night bone. Good night young lady squatting on boxes. Good night aerogel fog. Good night baseball glove. Good night black balloon. Good night wasps and foxes. Good night bird. Good night objects all furred. Good night gasoline and grease. Good night desire and release. Good night placebo. Good night gazebo. Good night table and sewing machine. Good night rock drill, all lean. Good night professor, whispering dream. Good night vista. Good night Christ, twisting his sister. Good night amber. Good night zodiac, Good night, Spaces, all Elastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Neil.
You're very
That was
kind.
great. Thank
You're
you so much. And I just wanted to say that this essay is also translated into Norwegian, and I might talk Norwegian too to that. Så dere finner både i katalogen og på nett på metamorf.no, så finner dere teksten til Neil på norsk også. Og ja. Thank you again.
Thank you. But if you want to ask some questions, I'm more than happy, although you'll have to make vigorous movements, as I can't, I'm short-sighted because of all the drawing. And it's dark. And I've had a drink. Any questions? English gentleman there.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for a wonderful journey.
Thank you.
I think one comment I would like to make, and this is really just to kind of give, because there are a lot of references here which both you, I know, and perhaps some of the other people know, but a lot of people won't know them. And I could recommend that if anyone is interested in kind of getting a kind of handle on this, and that would be to read a book by the Australian critic Robert Hughes called Shock of the New, which was also made into a television series, and that will give you, if you read that, you will realise what a lot of these references are, because it's about the new in art and design and architecture, and it looks at the impact of Freud and Jung on industrialization and technology in relationship to how arts and culture evolved from 1890 into the early modern period.
Yep.
That's the kind of recommendation.
That's a good recommendation, actually. I never thought of recommending that one, but it succinctly sums it up, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So can I then ask, if we're talking about, do you see this as an architectural critique?
From my point of view, as an architectural, yes. Yes, on one level it's a polemic and a criticism of where we are. Equally, it's a kind of memory theatre on where we were. And it's a kind of personal memory theatre as well. So it's a kind of rummage around in the drawers of modern art, Dada, Surrealism, poetry. Oulipo's important as well. So, yes, I write it as, I'm both, really. I'm an architect who draws, and people have called me a visionary architect. Although my friend Levius Woods says, don't ever use the word visionary, it allows people to truncate you off from the other bit of practice, which I think is very wise. But I don't mind being called a visionary architect, because I'm not sure I like the other bit of practice, having done it for years on end. So yes, a meandering answer, I think, a kind of pataphysical swerving answer. But I'm both, so yes, I do see it as a kind of drawn critical document, yeah, as well. Frederick.
Thank you so much for a really inspiring journey.
I like you all so much, I'll show you a bit more.
What would you say about the importance of sort of, this is memories?
Some of it's memories, some of it's psychogeographical and personal to me, and that's based on a kind of political belief that we must celebrate difference and that we must understand each other, and that on one level, and that political correctness can bring us down to a ubiquity that I don't think humanity needs. So, yeah, there's bits of me, there's bits of the history of art, there's bits of the history of poetry and prose, there's everything, really. That's why I can't finish it. There's a Norwegian, although he might be Swedish, you can never tell, guy who some of you might know, Per Kartvelt from Oslo. He's a friend, good old friend of mine, and a friend of Archigram. And we were sitting one day, not so many years ago, having a beer in Oslo, where all the ships come in. And he said, what you need to do is you need to do what Duchamp did, which was hide a bit and then die. You know, the key to it all is hidden, and then you die. And then everyone goes, he was a genius. And I thought, well, the downside of that is you don't get the genius thing while you're alive. So I'm still thinking about hiding a bit, burying a bit like a piece of venison. But it's still ongoing. I can show you a few little other bits. There's lots more. I mean, there's not. I just see what we've got here. The Darwinian leg I didn't really talk about much. There he is. That's where the baguette comes from. The Darwinian leg. They're models of the Darwinian leg. But again, I haven't told you about that, so I don't know why I'm showing you. And I'm not going to start now, because obviously we're all knackered now. But there are bits and pieces and stuff and things. And work. The Church of the Twisted Christ is part of it, because Dali did a Twisted Christ again, I think 1966. There are these kind of weird times, 1938, the Surrealist first exhibition, Kiesler's thing about the large glass, 1926, 27, the death of the Baroness, death of Hugo Boll, stuff happening there. And there's the kind of 1916 Fountain, God, the Church of the Twisted Christ, 1966, I think again, same as Lilith. So there's a kind of, I don't know, I haven't looked at it as a kind of exponential thing or a linear thing. You know, is it the half-life of artistic history? I don't know.
Could I ask the question? It was, I mean, this is part of our sort of cultural history, our identity. And then if, maybe that is not correct, but
no, I think
I just wonder how do you put feeling into this? Because it's a lot about feeling, not necessarily emotional feeling, that too, but the feeling of something that you can't really with it.
Yeah, I mean,
work on, but you have to work on with sort of a kind of feeling involved.
it's I get a feeling when it's something new, when an idea starts. I get a feeling. It's a kind of excited feeling, and I don't know quite why. But I do know that it's saying to me, "You like that? You need to weave that into the communicating vessel." So there's nothing logical about it. It's probably surrealist. It might be Dada. It might be Oulipo. It might be all sorts of things. It might be Gordon Pask in his ear. I get a feeling, and then it sits there, maybe for years, and then suddenly it kind of blurts out whilst I'm working. In terms of answering the question, it's me? Is it us? No, it's not us. It's me. You're all individuals. I feel like that sketch in Monty Python's Life of Brian. You're all individuals. Oh, I'm not. Yes. So your world is different to mine. you know, second-order cyberneticists with maverick deviational tendencies. That's me. That's my religion. And I build the world, as you do, I believe, by operating within it and building your worlds. And what my job as a teacher to do is to make you, help you, like a creative midwife, drag it out of you no matter how much you scream. But inside all of you is a wonderful architecture. Whether it's kitsch or cool, it doesn't matter. And so that's the important thing, because it's how we make our worlds that condition who we are as human beings. And that's why fewer of us must try to be Zaha Hadid. Or any of the, any of that lot. We need to be ourselves, because it's through being ourselves, I believe, that we can change the world into a nicer, more ecological place. You know, I'm willing to let you rip off my river slapper, which will save the world, obviously. But yeah, no, it's me. That's my world. Your world is different, but could be equally as rich, perhaps even richer. And that's what I think architecture school is all about. Anyway, I'll leave you with my twisted. It's not my twisted Christ. I wonder what's next. The geometries of Chimabui's crucifix. That's for another day. Thank you very much.